If the brothers can move forward as much as possible, please. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير مما خلقنا تفضيلا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This ayah in specific of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a very clear categorical statement that when we created man, we created him with honor, with dignity. We blessed the human being with karam. And we raised them in station in compared to others. We carried them above the seas and on the land, and we gave them certain sustenances. And we made different levels. So you find that within a community, you'll find different families and different individuals who have different levels of fadila. Some are more wise, some are more affluent, some are more knowledgeable, and so on and so forth. This differentiation has been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the caveat that Allah speaks of when He speaks about the nature of karam of the human being is that from a moral perspective, we all have a responsibility to treat others with akhlaq. That is absolutely imperative. When the desire of the human being overpowers this intellect, you realize that it can create an imbalance where you begin to mistreat others. And when we do so, as a community, the community begins to suffer. As a society, from a broader perspective, you realize that people suffer at a greater scale. The human being, this term is often used, intellectual intelligence, EQ. When you actually observe the riwayat of the Ahlul-bayt alayhim salam, and you observe their principles and disciplines, the precepts of how we should treat others and how we should communicate with others, it falls within the paradigm of intellectual intelligence. The term intellectual intelligence is fairly new. So you won't find this particular term in Arabic used by the Ahlul-bayt alayhim salam. You won't find them within our ahadith. But when you look at the principles that they speak about, it is absolutely in correlation with what the concept of intelligence, intellectual intelligence is. Emotional intelligence, sorry. So emotional intelligence is very, very much part and parcel within the narrations, within the principles and the teachings of the Ahlul-bayt alayhim salam. It comes down to this one single point. Emotional intelligence is when you behave with people, you make sure that that interaction is the best of interactions, or it molds to be the best of interactions. That whenever the two parties part ways, then they do not have ill feelings towards each other. Now imagine a society if people were to behave with one another with emotional intelligence. If one party begins to demonstrate anger, then the other party knows how to extinguish that anger, to make sure that the interaction molds itself in the best possible way. It is absolutely imperative to uphold the values of akhlaq. When there is an imbalance that is created, we see the ramifications of it within society. How we treat others. We treat others as human beings. We tap into our human emotions, what is known as humanness, and we behave with them in the same way. When you look at a child, the child when it's born, it is born pure, absolutely pure. Have you realized that when you look at an infant, you smile? Automatically you smile. What's the purpose behind that? What's the reasoning behind that? A child who is an infant, a child who is less than 1 year old, maybe just above 1 year of age, when we look at them, we smile automatically without thinking. Why? According to the scholars, according to the opinions of the ulama, they say that because the child is so pure, the fitrah of the child is pure. It hasn't become corrupted yet. And so when you interact with him, just by looking at him, the power of that fitrah affects your fitrah. And it makes you smile. That's the outcome of it. But then as the child grows up, naturally what happens is the society that he's raised in, the external environment, begin to corrupt the particular fitrah. So you find that concepts of aggression is taught to the child, not verbally, but through actions. The child or the children are like sponges. They observe the behavior of the people around them. And then they pick up certain types of behaviors. So if the parents, for example, teach the child how to be a racist, naturally the child will learn how to be a racist. Racism is not known by the child. It doesn't understand the differences based on skin color. So you find all of the different types of aggression, all of the different types of biases that exist within society is naturally taught to the child by the environment that they're in. The child, a human being, when it is born in the path of truth. This is the value that Islam teaches us. That the child is born, the journey, when it begins its journey, it begins the journey based on truth. What is our responsibility is to enhance that truth so that we are solidified within it. Western academia, Western philosophers approach it from the opposite direction. When you look at certain Western philosophers, they say that the journey of the human being begins when they doubt. So the whole concept of what we know of today, what's taught in universities, is all based on the principles of doubt. First, a person has to doubt and then build knowledge from that. Islam comes from a completely different perspective. The human being is born on truth, and he should enhance that truth. If you look at, for example, the words of Descartes, a famous philosopher, his famous sentence, I think, therefore I am. I am. I think, therefore I am. Meaning what? Even the reality that I'm surrounded by, I don't have confidence to say that everything exists. But as long as I can think, I know that I exist at least. Yes, doubt everything except for myself. If you look at the words of Kant, for example, Immanuel Kant, if you look at the words of Nietzsche, Nietzsche says that doubt is absolutely pertinent and important. It's necessary to question traditional values and beliefs. And so you have all of these philosophers who propound the idea of doubt and how truth should be built on it, whereas Islam says that you already have the truth built on it. Have you noticed that in society, there are certain aspects that we rely on so much, we don't know or we are unaware as to how it begins to affect our relationship with the people around us, and that is technology. Especially within the past 5 or 10 years, technology has evolved to such an extent that there are still processes of research being done, or research is now being done currently to actually examine the ramifications of the effect of technology within our lives. And we're not talking about social media. Social media is just one aspect of it. If you look at, for example, the concept of industrialization, AI is a very, very new phenomenon, isn't it? People speak about how AI is revolutionizing our world, and it's true. But when you look at history, this is not the first time how technology has revolutionized the way we work and interact with people. You had the first 3 revolutions. This is the 4th, according to some researchers. They categorize this as the 4th revolution within the world. When you look at what happened in the first 3 revolutions, although technology was now being introduced to society and people benefited from it greatly, the damaging aspect of it was that people were now being fired from their jobs. Technology was all of a sudden replacing manpower, labor. So people lost their jobs. You see, the ramifications of this is that when people lose their jobs, now in those times, of course, the father would be the breadwinner, the mother or the wife would stay home and look after the children. That was the social norm at the time. When fathers lost their jobs, unemployment has an effect on the family. Some people come and they say, yes, but it allowed us as societies to kind of mold ourselves and become used to the new technology. So it created jobs as well. Yes, you're right. There were good aspects that came from the change in technology and the introduction of technology. But at the same time, people lost their jobs and families were affected. And they didn't switch to new technology very, very quickly. It took them years to get used to it. But the effect was that families were being affected. So you had, for example, fathers unemployed, or for example, they were working more dangerous, risk-worthy jobs. That all of that has an effect on the family unit. Wives had to go out and work and earn for the family. All of this has an effect on how the family is raised, how children are nurtured. So with the introduction of AI, already we are seeing the effects of AI, how millions of jobs are now rendered useless because you have a machine that is capable of doing much more better than what the human being is capable of doing. So we're going to see a very large or a deluge of unemployment taking place within the market force. It will take a few years for us to adjust to it and get used to it so that new jobs are created and so on and so forth. When you look at technology, when you look at, for example, social media, 15 years ago we had this debate when Facebook first launched itself, yes, one of the earliest or somewhat earliest social media platforms. The mosques and the masajids started to began to have these discussions. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I remember one scholar, I was a teenager at the time, one scholar said it's a double-edged sword. It can go in any direction. There is good that comes from it. We get to propagate Islam, let the world know about Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. But the negative ramifications, I would say and argue very strongly, outweigh the good that comes from social media. The whole purpose of social media was created to network people, but now all of a sudden people are lonely. Why is there such vast loneliness within our societies? The perception of beauty has changed. And you know who's benefited and profited from social media? The plastic surgeons. The whole concept of beauty has been skewed at such a rapid rate. And of course, with the whole introduction of filters, the whole idea of beauty has been molded in a different way. When you look at, for example, the idea of artificial wombs. You know, there was a public debate just a few months ago, late last year, I believe it was, when a Muslim debated with an atheist. And in the opening statements, the Muslim said that we're living in a world where everything is replaced by technology. And he spoke about the presence of artificial wombs. And when he mentioned it, the people in the crowd began to laugh at him because it's something that is absolutely absurd. But literally 2 or 3 weeks later, there were certain articles that were released where this is now being looked into. That there is this potential idea of having artificial wombs. You see, the problem with artificial wombs, people will say, well, this is technology. Why can't we accept this? Well, on the one hand, yes, it's technology and we all benefit from it. But on the other hand, it devalues the whole purpose of marriage. When you look at the institution of marriage as it is envisaged by the religion of Islam, from the very beginning, how you meet your spouse, how you interact with them, the point of marriage, the intimacy that comes, every aspect of marriage is sanctified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, the children that come forth, all of that is sanctified, and we all have a responsibility from the very beginning until the very end. There are roles and responsibilities and obligations from both parties. Now, if you have the introduction of artificial wombs, what does that mean? It means that you can skip all of the process and have a child that is born for you to raise that child later on. As in, from an akhlaqi perspective, this has a massive question mark on what spirituality this brings. Yes, as human beings, we're not individualistic. Yes, we're supposed to be part and parcel of society. And of course, this will have a damaging effect in society. At first, people will praise this and celebrate this. But then later on, 20 years later, when the research comes out, you'll see how damaging it is in society as a whole. When you look at war, and the conduct of war. Technology has changed drastically. In the olden days, during the times of the barbarians, they would go to war and they would fight one-on-one. Yes, there's that physical interaction that's taking place. They know exactly who they're attacking and who they are facing. That has a certain sense of, it affects the human being. They know exactly what they're doing. Now in the art of war, if you look at, for example, how war is approached, you'll have in one of these testimonies that was released by one of these workers during the recent war, she came forward publicly and she said, it's strange. It was very, very strange. I found a person who I was working with. In the morning, he would wake up, he would kiss his wife on the cheek, he would come to work, he would press a button, he would kill many. Other side of the globe, he would kill many. And then he would go home and he would, for example, attend a soccer match in the evening. Right? It changes the whole perspective of how we treat other human beings and how we see them. One of the concepts that is often raised amongst the ulama is the concept of dehumanization. Dehumanization is when you refer to another human being. You don't even consider them to be a human being. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The concept of dehumanization is that when you've developed your morality to such a level where you don't even consider the other person to be a human being. You consider them to be a non-human or a subhuman, someone who is not even categorized as a human being. You see them on the level of an animal. Now when you treat another individual as an animal, all of a sudden this brings about negative effects. The oppression that is then directed towards them, it's followed by the lack of guilt and the lack of remorse. That's why when you see a lot of the crimes that take place in the world today, where a human being is very much easily capable of killing another human being, it's because of the process of dehumanization. A few nights ago we spoke about the concept of othering, yes? The extreme stages of othering is when you dehumanize a fellow human being. And it always begins with language and how we treat them through words. You take any war in human civilization, you will see the process of dehumanization taking place. Dehumanization is when you psychologically change the mind of the human being through words and the play of words. So for example, in World War II, Hitler, when he galvanized his army, he used to refer to the non-Germans or the Jews as rodents and rats. See, this insult is enough to treat them as rodents and rats. Yesterday we spoke about how social interactions, how society has an influence on you. Yes? Now if you have an entire community who thinks that a particular race are rodents and rats and need to be exterminated, eventually they believe in it and they were able to commit the crimes they were because they didn't see the other as a human being. They saw them as rodents and rats. The whole concept of the Aryan race, that the blue-eyed, blonde hair is superior than all others. The idea of the Übermensch, that we are stronger and superior. And everyone other than us are considered to be the Untermensch, yes, are beneath us. The language, the power of language has an effect, even when it comes to dealing with other human beings. When you look at, for example, the genocide in Rwanda in 94, between the Hutus and the Tutsis, yes, again, one party labeled the other party as cockroaches. Yes, they're not human beings, they're cockroaches. We need to clear the fields. That form of language changes the psychology of the human being. It dehumanizes them. You don't see them as a human being anymore. You see them as an insect, as a rodent, as an animal. When you look at, for example, Bosnia, the genocide against the Muslims, they would term and they would label the Muslims as aliens. They're not even considered to be humans. And then, of course, the crimes that committed or were committed from that. In the recent wars, you have testimonies beyond testimonies. The numbers are great, where you had a soldier who was very much willing to kill from someone from the other nation because they didn't see them as human beings. So the whole concept of language has an effect on how you treat others. You know, they say Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Again, when you refer to our heritage has gone through this. This is not something new. It's existed since the time of the Imams of the Ahlul-bayt alayhim salam. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, the way he would murder the Shi'as, it's something for you to look into. The numbers were staggering, the amount of Shi'as that he killed and slaughtered. All because the hatred that he had, the animosity he had towards the Ahlul-bayt. Towards the end of his life, there was one person that he killed, Sa'id ibn Jubair. They say Sa'id ibn Jubair, when he knew or when he came to know that there was a bounty on his head, he migrated towards Azerbaijan. He went to Isfahan, he went to Qom, he went to Azerbaijan. Then he came back to Mecca. Mecca. When he entered Mecca, they arrested him. When they arrested him, they took him to Kufa. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, he's now taken him in as a prisoner. So he enters the courthouses of Hajjaj. There's a discussion that takes place between them, a very interesting discussion. Hajjaj says to him, when he sees him, he says to him, I now have the opportunity to send you to hell within the world. So Sa'id replies, he says to him, if that's the case, then you should go and call yourself a god. Because only God has the power to take someone to hell, not you. He says, yes, and then he says to him, what is your opinion with regards to the Prophet? He says, Rasulullah is rahmatul lil alameen. He says, what about Ali? Is he in heaven or hell? So Sa'id says that, once I get to heaven, then I can know if he's there. Or if I was to go to hell, then I would know if the Imam is there. Only Allah has knowledge of where the individuals go, heaven or hell. Like the answers that he was given were very diplomatic, by the way. And then he asks him, he says, what is your opinion with regards to the Khulafa? So Sa'id replies, he says, why? Why do you ask? Are you their representative, or do you, for example, defend them? He says, do you love them more or do you love Ali more? So Sa'id replies, he says, I love the one whom Allah loves. And whoever Allah has chosen to be his representative, that's where my love is inclined towards. So he asks, he says, who does Allah love more? Ali or them? So he replies, he says, a person who has deep spiritual insight knows who Allah loves. Meaning, we don't know what Allah loves. We need to develop that level of spirituality to know where exactly Allah's love is directed towards. So then Hajjaj gets very, very infuriated at this point. He says, why don't you answer my questions very, very clearly? These are very simple questions I'm asking you. I expect simple answers. The discussion carries on. Towards the end, Hajjaj then tells him, Ya Sa'id, how do you want to die? I'm giving you that blessing. How do you want to die? He says, it doesn't matter. Either way, I am Sa'id. I am the fortunate one, the way my mother has named me. They say that when Hajjaj then ordered the executioner to go and kill him, before he was executed, he asks Allah, the dua of the oppressed. Yes, dua of the oppressed is not something that we should undermine. We should fear the dua of the oppressed. He says, Ya Allah, do not give him respite. Ya Allah, hold him accountable for his actions. Let there not be a single human being who is harmed by him after me. He's executed. They say within 16 days to 40 days, depending on the narrations, Hajjaj died. How did he die? This is a very interesting part. They say he lost his ability to sleep. He couldn't sleep anymore. Every time he would be unconscious, he would see Sa'id coming towards him and choking him, grabbing him by the neck. And when that would happen, he would awake. So he wasn't able to sleep. A human being who goes without sleep for 48 hours, he becomes insane. And that's exactly what happened to Hajjaj. He became insane. He lost his mind. Within 40 days, he died. And he commanded his successor, he said, bury me in secret and do not put any plaques over my grave out of fear that they would come and exhume my body. And that's exactly what happened. When you refer to the Holy Quran, for example, وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. Those who engage in oppression, they will soon see what their end is. There's a different ayah in the Holy Quran. What is their end? Allah says, فَأَتَى اللَّهُ بُنْيَانَهُمْ مِنَ الْقَوَائِدِ. These people, they think they have power and authority. When the time comes, and the time will most definitely come, Allah will take their building, their organization from the very foundations, from the roots. فَخَّرَ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّقْفُ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ. And the roofs will fall upon their heads. وَأَتَاهُمُ الْعَذَابُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And the adhab will come towards them from areas that they had never seen. This is the inevitable end of every oppressor. You look at any period in history, you pick out an oppressor in that history, see how they left this world. Either their entire organization and system collapsed, or they died in the worst of ways, in humiliation. You look at Muawiyah, Yazid, you look at, for example, the Bani Umayyah, the Bani Abbas, you look at recent ones, Saddam and so on and so forth. All of them left this world in the state of humiliation. The arrogance they developed to the extent that he began to oppress others by dehumanizing others. The whole process of dehumanization hardens the heart, and it removes human emotions. And human emotions is natural. So by engaging in oppression, you're now moving towards something which is unnatural. Oppression cannot just be physical. There are different types and manifestations of oppression. Oppression at times can be ideological. You could be perfectly safe. You could be perfectly safe. There's aman and security given to you. But ideologically, you could be attacked. And it changes your way, it changes your worldview to the extent that it changes how you live your life. And we're seeing this more, very much more, in these times, in these ages. That there is an attack on religion from all different perspectives and all different dimensions. Hijr ibn Adi al-Kindi, there's a beautiful concept between his life, especially his death, and how he approached himself in refutation to this particular ideology, or the attack of ideologies. Hijr ibn Adi al-Kindi, when you examine his death, he was a good companion, one of the best companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen as well as Imam Hassan alayhi salam. But there's an issue, or there's a period in his life when he questioned Imam Hassan alayhi salam. And you can't really blame him for that because he's not a ma'soom. So for example, the peace treaty that he signed with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, a lot of the companions objected to Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Hijr ibn Adi al-Kindi was one of them. He couldn't understand the wisdom behind why Imam Hassan signed the peace treaty. Years later, today we know why Imam Hassan signed the peace treaty. Anytime you want to have an argument or a debate whether Muawiyah was a believer or a hypocrite, refer to the peace treaty of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Because he broke every condition that the Imam had stipulated. One of them was that Muawiyah is not to kill any believer. But he went ahead and he murdered Hujr ibn Adi al-Kindi. They say when they captured him, they forced him, disown Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, no, that's never going to happen. He said, we will kill you. He said, go ahead. Before they killed him, they said, is there anything that you want to say? Or is there any final wasiyah that you have? He says, bring my son. So they brought him his son. And then he commanded the executioner. He said, execute my son. Ajib. He said, execute my son. They asked him, why? Your son hasn't committed any crime. He's young. He said, doesn't matter. My will, you asked for my wasiyah? I'm telling you, my wasiyah is kill my son. They executed his son. And then when they were on the verge of executing him, they asked him, why did you want us to kill your son? He said, because I do not want to think that my son would adopt the ideologies and the principles of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. He has the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I am now happy in the state of serenity that he left this world with that happiness in his heart. Ya Ali. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Hujr ibn Adi al-Kindi recognized that there was a war of ideologies that were taking place in his time. But his response is a very interesting response, a very difficult response, was that to make sure that his son, instead of being influenced by the different ideologies, he left with the correct ideology. So the type of words that we use when we interact with others, they have to be chosen very, very carefully. The way we interact with others, even the way we behave with others, has to be very, very thought out in the most appropriate of ways. The ayah of the Holy Quran mentions this. You know, the beauty of the Quran is sometimes we overlook even the most simplest of ayahs. But the idea behind this is that prevention is better than cure, isn't it? وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. When you turn to the people, say nice things to them. لِلنَّاسِ, not to the mu'mineen or the believers. To every single human being, speak nicely, use good words. Do not dishearten the heart. Why? Through using bad and abusive language. Because if it is not controlled, it will develop into something else. And it will develop to the area or to the extent of dehumanization. And it's very much possible. It's happened many a times over history. When it reaches the stages of dehumanization, then oppression can be manifest without remorse, without regret. From a different perspective, the concept of emotional intelligence is that we develop empathy within our hearts. And the Quran, the message of the Quran is very much so infused with the idea and the concept of empathy. That we feel what other people are feeling. We behave as to how they would behave. To be on their shoes or to be in their shoes, so to speak. There's a concept known as witness empathy. Witness empathy is that you feel what the other person is feeling to the extent that it materializes in terms of your actions. And it could be as small as a smile. And it could be as great as creating policies on an international level. So something as insignificant as a smile can be recognized as empathy. It has an effect on the people around us. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That choice is in our hands. What type of a culture, what type of a community, what type of a society we want to build. Yes, the desires will pull us in different directions, but we have to be grounded, tap into the fitrah and to behave with others based on goodness, which is the natural state of the human being. You look at what happened in Siffin. When Muawiyah took control of the Furat, the Euphrates, he blocked the army of the Imam having access to the water. So the Imam sent 2 messengers towards Muawiyah. Unblock the water, open the water, otherwise we will launch an attack and we will take over the water. You know, according to some historians mention this. They say that when they came towards Muawiyah, Muawiyah refused to give water to the army of the Imam. And the reason why was, he said that Allah has refused the pond of Kawthar to Muawiyah and Abi Sufyan. For that reason, the Euphrates or the Furat is forbidden for Ali and his followers. Fitrah, sometimes it speaks out, but then the arrogance and the desires, it overpowers the fitrah. Don't underestimate the power of the fitrah. Sometimes people know the truth, but they don't want to submit towards it. So the Imam launches the attack because Muawiyah refuses. He takes power of the river. He takes over control. So the companions, they came to him and they said, now we have the opportunity to block Muawiyah and his army from the river. If we refuse to give them water, we will win the battle. The Imam says, Baba, this is the water for every single human being. This is a basic right that all human beings deserve. Water was then given to Muawiyah and of course his companions and his army as well. When you look at the movement of Karbala, Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, the movement from the very beginning until what happened on the day of Ashura was infused with spirituality. It wasn't a physical battle for political power. It was infused with spirituality. And this was manifested in 3 ways. In the first way, the Imam had trust, tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, he was happy with the decisions and the decrees of Allah. Every brother, son, nephew that the Imam, every friend that the Imam lost on the 10th of Muharram, he was content with what Allah had chosen for him on that day. Third, it was his absolute submission to Allah. Never did he question the wisdom and the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He submitted to the will and the authority and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What happened in Karbala on the 10th of Muharram, the behavior that was directed towards the children, this was very unnatural. The level of dehumanization, the level of oppression that was seen on that day, it wasn't seen any time before that. The attitude towards children, to willfully kill children, this was oppression in its peak. You know, they say, according to some narrations, this particular event happened after Ashura. Shaykh al-Saduq mentions the martyrdom of the two sons of Muslim ibn Aqil. It happened after Ashura, nearly a year after Ashura, according to some narrations. Some say before, some say after. Shaykh Saduq says it happened after. The two children of Muslim ibn Aqil, when they escaped from the prisons, they went to a house of an old woman. They mentioned to the old woman that we are from the lineage, from the progeny of Rasulullah. She cries, she gives them shelter. When she gives them shelter, she says, the owner of the house, he's not home, but he's an enemy of Allah. He was there, he participated in Karbala. I don't know if he'll be back in the middle of the night or he'll be back tomorrow, but stay in this house until the time of Fajr and then you can leave. So they slept. In the middle of the night, the husband or the son comes home. The mother tells the son, where were you? Why did you come home late? He says, news has come out that two children have escaped from the dungeons of Ibn Ziyad. There's a bounty on their head, 1,000 dinars for each son. So I was out in the streets of Kufa looking for them. So he has his dinner, he goes to sleep. In the middle of the night, he hears noises. The two children, they were crying. One of them had a bad dream. He saw his father in his dream, and his father was telling him, come, come. So when he woke up crying. So the other brother was comforting him, consoling him, and so on and so forth. He heard the noise. The man heard the noise. He enters the room. He sees the two sons of Muslim ibn Aqil. He takes them towards the Furat. In the morning, at the time of Fajr, he takes them towards the Furat. There's a slave that he takes with him. He tells the slave to go and execute the two sons. So the slave has the sword in his hands. He approaches the two sons of Muslim. The sons of Muslim, they say to him, you remind us of Bilal, the mu'adhin of Rasulullah. Do you not know that we are from the progeny of Rasulullah? The slave, when he hears these words, he drops the sword, he runs away. Then the man himself picks up the sword, he comes towards them. Now they plead, the two children, they plead to this man. At first they say, have mercy on us, we are children. He says, there is no mercy in my heart. Second, they say to him, for example, they say, take us to Ibn Ziyad, but take us alive. Give Ibn Ziyad the choice to do whatever he wishes with us. But you don't kill us. Take us to him alive. He refuses. He says that I will seek proximity with Ibn Ziyad by taking your heads. Even in the final moments, the older son tells the person, kill me first because I cannot bear to see my younger brother be slaughtered. And the person slaughters the younger son and then he kills the oldest son. When he takes the head to Ibn Ziyad, he places it on the table. Ibn Ziyad, he says, what is this? He says, these are the two sons of Muslim ibn Aqil. They say when Ibn Ziyad saw their faces, it's as if the faces were light as the bright moon. And he stood up and he sat. 3 times he stood up and he sat. He was in a state of absolute uneasiness. And then he said to the man, he said to the killer, he said, did they say anything to you before you slaughtered them? He said, yes, they pleaded to me. They said this, they said that. He narrated the whole account of what they said. And Ibn Ziyad himself, the irony here, Ibn Ziyad himself says, did you not have mercy upon them? He then appointed one of the guards to take this man where he slaughtered the sons for him to then be executed. When you look at Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. After Karbala, the Imam is in Medina. There is the revolution that takes place in Medina. The revolution was strong, in the sense that the governor of Medina, Marwan ibn Hakim, had to leave He escaped Medina. Otherwise, they would have captured him and killed him. That's how strong the revolution of Medina was. You know what Marwan did? He comes knocking on Imam Sajjad alayhi salam's door. He says, look, I have to leave, but my women and my children are here. Look after them. These are the wives of the Bani Umayyah, the children of the Bani Umayyah. How does Imam Sajjad respond? He tells his community none of them are to touch the women and the children. He gives them accommodation in his own home. According to some report, 400 of them and their extended family were taking sanctuary in the house of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. That level of empathy can never be seen by any individual except the Ahlul-bayt alayhi salam. Their husbands were killers of the family of Rasulullah. Yet the Imam reciprocates with kindness and empathy. His heart goes out to the women and the children. They have nothing to do with this revolution. I will protect them. There's a very interesting narration. A man by the name of Abdullah ibn Fadl al-Hashimi, he approaches Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. You want to know and understand how spiritual the movement of Karbala is? It's summarized in this hadith. It says, Yabna Rasulillah, how did the day of Ashura become Ashura, the day of Musibah, the day of Gham? Such that when Rasulullah left this world, his death, his shahada was not considered to be the day of Gham the way it is with regards to Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Likewise, when Bibi left this world, she was martyred. But her day of martyrdom is not as significant as the day of Ashura in terms of Gham and Musibah. Likewise, Ali ibn Abi Talib, 19th of Ramadan, 21st of Ramadan, when he leaves this world, his death date did not become as significant as the 10th of Muharram. And likewise, Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Imam Sadiq responds, he says the reason behind that is because when the Prophet left this world, Bibi, Ali alayhi salam, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were there to perform the gham of his passing. When Ali alayhi salam left this world, when Bibi left this world, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein alayhi salam were there performing the musibah and the gham of Bibi. When Imam Ali passed away, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein both together would perform the gham of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam Hassan, when he passed, his brother Abi Abdullah was there to perform his gham. But when Aba Abdullah alayhi salam, none was there to perform the gham of the Imam alayhi salam. So the narrator, he responds, he asks a follow-up question. He says, but Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was there. He says, true, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was there, but he was not from Ahl al-Kisa. He wasn't someone who met Rasulullah, who saw Rasulullah, who heard from him. He inherited the knowledge of Rasulullah through his fathers. But that connection, that relationship wasn't there. The Ahl al-Kisa, they have a level of fadila. He said when Aba Abdullah alayhi salam died, there was no one of his level of Ahl al-Kisa that were there in the earth to remember him and to engage in his gham. That's the spirituality of Karbala. And the movement of Karbala will exist and will remain in perpetuity. Karbala doesn't need us to remember it. We need to remember it. We are in need. When there is truth, it is us who are in need of the truth. The truth doesn't need us. You find on the 10th of Muharram, Abu Abdullah alayhi salam is now alone. He is now alone and he is preparing to enter the battlefield. He calls out, Hal min nasirin yansurna, hal min mu'inin yu'inuna. He then enters the tents of the ladies. He prepares himself to go out into the battlefield. When he sees Al-Radhi' Al-Asghar, he tells Zainab, Ya Zainab, bring me the infant so I can bid my farewells. So Zainab approaches the infant, she picks him up and she brings him to Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. They say Abu Abdullah sat on the floor and he placed the infant on his arms, on his laps. And he begins to speak with Aliyun al-Asghar. He says to him, O my son, may Allah He says, "Oh, Ya Allah, do not let the people..." He says, "Ya Allah, let there be a distance between me and the people." He says, "Ya Allah, let there be a distance between the people and your mercy. Their adversities, let it increase on the day of judgment as well as this life, because of the enmity they have towards your progeny." He then looks at the infant, he embraces the infant, he kisses the infant. Then they say that the women, they told Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, said, "Why don't you go and get some water for the infant?" They will not kill the infant. That was the idea that they had formed in themselves, that there is no way, there is no chance, that as cruel as they are, they will not be willing to kill the infant. So Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he leaves the tent, he approaches the enemies. He then calls out to the enemies. He says, "You have killed my brothers and my helpers. You have killed my sons. There is no one except this child. This child has not committed any crime." He says to them, "O people, if you fight me, then keep it with me. This child is sinless. Give it some water. If you don't have mercy on me, then have mercy on my child." There was a split within the army. A good portion of them, they began crying. They began saying, "Give water to the child." The other half, they were hard-hearted. They said, "No, even the child does not deserve mercy." So there was an infight that existed within the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Umar ibn Sa'ad knew that if this was to continue, his army would fall apart. So he turns to Harmala ibn Kahil. He says, "Ya Harmala, اقطع نزاع القوم, end this dispute." Harmala asks, "Ya Umar ibn Sa'ad, how am I supposed to end this dispute?" He says, "Ya Harmala, strike the infant." They say that Harmala, he then draws an arrow, a three-pointed arrow. Some narrations mention that Harmala, he's blinded by his tears, so he shoots the first arrow, he misses. Then he draws a second arrow. When he shoots the infant, when the arrow strikes the neck of Ali al-Asghar, it slaughters him from one jugular to another, as the narrations mention, min waridin ila warid. The poet, he begins to describe the scene. He says that the heart is torn apart with patience. If it was a rock, the rock would have exploded. Abu Abdullah lowers his head to kiss the neck of Ali al-Asghar, but it was the arrow who kissed the neck before his father. Then Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he says, "Ya Allah, do not let the man be unpunished." Just as how the murderer of the she-camel of Saleh was not left unpunished. Ya Allah, if you have kept victory away from us, then for what is to come, make it better and greater. Then Abu Abdullah, he hears a voice from the heavens, "Da'hu ya Hussein, فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ مُرْضِعًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ." Let him go, Ya Abu Abdullah, for there is a nursing mother waiting for him in Jannah. Then Abu Abdullah returns to the tents. He carries the infant. When he approaches the tent, Zainab, she comes out of the tent and she sees Ali al-Asghar. She begins to cry and lament. How does Abu Abdullah break the news to Rabab? He doesn't go to Rabab, he enters the tent. They say that Sukaina came running to Abu Abdullah. She said, Ya Abata, did they give water for my young brother? How can Abu Abdullah respond to Sukaina? Ya Sukaina, look what they did to him. They severed his neck min waridin ila warid. Then Sukaina begins to cry and lament. Kulthum, she takes the baby in her arms. She places it on her chest. Then she places her neck alongside the neck of Aliun al-Asghar. Then she begins to wail and scream, Wa Muhammada wa Aliya. What enemies did we find after you? Look at your son Abu Abdullah. He is now stained by the blood of his son. He's grieved by the arrow that has slaughtered the infant. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون.